Clint Eastwood is one of Hollywood's most famous actors and directors. For more than 70 years, he has been a powerful figure in the film industry. He has acted in westerns, thrillers, and dramas, and he has directed many award-winning films. People often talk about his career, his success, and his influence, but very few know about the complicated relationships in his personal life. Eastwood has always tried to keep control of his public image, choosing what stories are told and what secrets stay hidden. However, there is one story that he could never fully erase. It is the story of a woman named Sandra Locke, who was different from anyone else in his life. She was not just a co-star or a partner. She was someone who challenged his need for control and made him face emotions he had tried to ignore. Their relationship was full of passion, betrayal, sacrifice, and conflict. And even now, many years later, it is remembered as one of the most powerful yet tragic chapters of his life. Sandra Locke remains the woman who forced Clint Eastwood to deal with something he could not direct, edit, or erase: the truth of love and loss. Before Clint Eastwood became a Hollywood legend, he was simply a young man trying to find his way in the world. He was born in 1930 and grew up in California during the Great Depression. Unlike many stories of hardship from that time, Clint's family was actually quite comfortable. They lived in good neighborhoods, had a swimming pool, and even a country club membership. Still, Clint was restless and uninterested in school. Teachers described him as a poor student, and he was eventually asked to leave one high school after playing pranks. As a teenager, he loved cars and women more than books. He worked odd jobs, from lumberjack to lifeguard, and later joined the army. When he arrived in Hollywood, success did not come easily. Directors thought he was stiff, awkward, and not good at delivering lines. His first studio contract was small, and after a few minor roles in low-budget films, the studio dropped him. For a while, he dug swimming pools to pay his bills and wondered if he should give up acting altogether. But this struggle built something important in him: a deep need to succeed and, more importantly, a need to control his own future. Eventually, Clint Eastwood found his big break in the TV show Rawhide, and then in Western films like A Fistful of Dollars. His career began to rise, and soon he became one of the most recognizable actors in the world. But the struggles of his early years had shaped his personality. Clint developed a strong sense of independence and control. He wanted things his way, both in his career and in his personal life. In 1953, he married Maggie Johnson, a young woman who would stay married to him for many years. But Clint later admitted that their marriage had been rocky from the start. He told a magazine that Maggie had to accept he would live as he pleased, or their marriage would not last. For Clint, this meant having many affairs. In fact, he had already fathered a daughter with another woman before he married Maggie, though the baby was given up for adoption. During his marriage, he had several long-term affairs, including one with stuntwoman Roxanne Tunis, with whom he had another daughter. Maggie tolerated this lifestyle, and many described their relationship as an open marriage. This arrangement showed Clint's complicated way of dealing with women. He valued freedom and control above loyalty, and he kept his partners at a distance. But there was one woman who he treated differently: his mother, Ruth. She was the only woman he openly called the most important in his life, and he even took her to the Academy Awards as his guest. For Clint, women were often divided into two groups: motherly figures he respected and lovers he kept at arm's length. That was until Sandra Locke entered his world. Sandra Locke's story began far away from Hollywood. She was born in a small town in Tennessee in 1944. Unlike Clint, her childhood was not easy. She often said her parents were distant and uninvolved, but she was intelligent, ambitious, and determined to succeed. She graduated as the valedictorian of her class and dreamed of escaping her small-town life. In 1967, she entered a nationwide talent search for the film The Heart is a Lonely Hunter. To everyone's surprise, Sandra won the part. And in her very first movie, she was nominated for an Academy Award for Best Supporting Actress. She had talent, beauty, and a strong will, and Hollywood quickly noticed her. However, Sandra's personal life was unusual. That same year, she married her childhood friend Gordon Anderson, who was openly gay. Their marriage was a deep friendship rather than a romance, and Gordon remained her closest emotional support for the rest of her life. When Sandra met Clint Eastwood in the mid-1970s, she was already an accomplished actress. But it was their work together on the film The Outlaw Josie Wales in 1976 that changed everything. On the set, Clint and Sandra felt an immediate connection. Even though both were married, Clint to Maggie and Sandra to Gordon, they began living together during filming. For Clint, Sandra was unlike anyone else. She was strong, independent, and had her own life, yet she was willing to share an intense romance with him. To Clint, she was the perfect partner. but the very things that made her different would later cause conflict. During the first years of their relationship, Clint and Sandra were seen as one of Hollywood's most powerful couples. They worked on 6 films together in just 7 years, including The Gauntlet, Every Which Way But Loose, and Sudden Impact. Their chemistry on screen was real, and audiences loved watching them together. Clint even told Sandra that she was the first woman who made him truly believe in love. He once sang a song for her that included the line, "She made me monogamous." For a man famous for countless affairs, this was a shocking confession. Sandra also believed in his love. She gave up opportunities to work with other directors because Clint wanted her to work only with him. Over time, however, this limited her career. Hollywood stopped seeing her as an independent star and began seeing her as Clint's partner. Still, Sandra devoted herself fully to their relationship. She even made the most painful sacrifice for him. During their years together, she became pregnant twice, but Clint did not want more children. At his request, she ended both pregnancies. Later, she agreed to a medical procedure that made it impossible for her to ever have children again. Sandra later admitted that this decision broke her heart, especially since she had dreamed of having a family. But she believed it was the price of staying with Clint. For her, it was a permanent act of devotion. For him, it was another example of controlling the terms of their relationship. While Sandra Locke believed she and Clint were building a future together, Clint was secretly creating another life behind her back. In the early 1980s, he began a hidden affair with a flight attendant named Jocelyn Reeves. This was not just a short fling, it lasted for years. With Jocelyn, Clint had 2 children, Scott, born in 1986, and Catherine, born in 1988. Shockingly, on their birth certificates, Clint's name was left off, listed only as "father declined." This secret allowed Clint to hide his second family not only from the public, but also from Sandra. For at least 4 years, while Sandra was sacrificing everything for him, Clint was lying to her daily. She had no idea about his double life until many years later when an investigative journalist exposed the truth. The betrayal was deeper than she could have ever imagined. Sandra had believed she was the woman who had finally tamed Clint's restless heart. Instead, she discovered that he had been building another family while she gave up her own chance to be a mother. This revelation shattered her trust and exposed the painful reality of Clint's control. He could love her, but only on his terms. He could share his life with her, but also with someone else. Sandra, who had once been at the center of his world, now realized she had been living in a carefully managed illusion. The end of Clint and Sandra's relationship came suddenly and brutally in 1989. While Sandra was away directing her second film, Clint decided it was over. Instead of telling her in person, he hired a crew to pack up all her belongings from their home and move them into storage. He then changed the locks on the house they had shared. When Sandra returned, she discovered she was literally locked out of her own life. Clint had ended a 14-year relationship without a conversation, without closure, and without compassion. For Sandra, it was not only heartbreaking, but also humiliating. Yet she refused to be silent. She did something very few in Hollywood had ever dared to do. She sued Clint Eastwood. Her first lawsuit was for palimony, a form of support for long-term partners. In court, Clint's lawyers tried to downplay their relationship, even calling her nothing more than an occasional roommate. The case dragged on, and during that time, Sandra was diagnosed with breast cancer. The stress was overwhelming, and eventually, she agreed to settle. Clint provided money, a house, and most importantly, a promise of a 3-year directing deal with Warner Brothers. This seemed like a chance for Sandra to rebuild her career, but once again, Clint had managed to control the outcome. Sandra soon discovered that the Warner Brothers deal was a sham. She worked hard and brought many film ideas to the studio, but all were rejected. Later, she learned the shocking truth. Clint had secretly paid Warner Brothers the money himself. It was never a real opportunity, only a trick to keep her quiet and limit her future. Feeling betrayed again, Sandra sued Clint for fraud in 1995. The trial revealed the truth about the secret deal, and the jury was leaning strongly in her favor. Just before they could deliver a verdict, Clint settled out of court. Sandra felt vindicated, but the damage was done. Hollywood turned its back on her. People were afraid to work with her, fearing Clint's power. She was effectively blacklisted. Her once promising career reduced to silence. In 1997, she published a book, The Good, the Bad, and the Very Ugly, telling her side of the story. But many media outlets ignored it, and even scheduled interviews were canceled. A television documentary about Clint's career that year showed clips from the films he made with her. But she was edited out almost entirely. It was as if she had never been there. The erasure was nearly complete. Sandra Locke had given 14 years of her life to Clint Eastwood, but in return, she was written out of his story. In her later years, Sandra lived quietly. She directed a few small projects but never regained her place in Hollywood. In November 2018, she died of cancer at the age of 74. The news of her death was not reported for 6 weeks, and Clint Eastwood made no public statement. At the following year's Academy Awards, her name was not even included in the In Memoriam segment. To many, this felt like the final act of erasing her from history. But the truth could not be erased completely. Her lawsuits, her book, and her story all remain as records that Clint could never fully control. In a strange twist, just as Sandra's death became public, Clint released a film called The Mule. In the movie, he plays an old man filled with regret, trying to make peace with an ex-wife as she dies of cancer. The parallels to Sandra's real story were impossible to ignore. Today, at 95 years old, Clint Eastwood is seen as a Hollywood legend, a symbol of strength and independence. But behind that carefully crafted image lies the story of a woman he could never truly erase. Sandra Locke was the only one who forced him to confront the truth of love, betrayal, and loss. She was the only one who could make him face something he could not control: the human heart. As Clint and Sandra's relationship became more serious, a shocking truth was quietly unfolding behind the curtains. Unknown to Sandra, Clint had already started another family with a woman named Jocelyn Reeves, a flight attendant. While Sandra believed she was Clint's partner in every sense, Clint was living a double life, keeping his other relationships and children away from Sandra's eyes. This discovery later became one of the most painful betrayals Sandra would ever face. To imagine the heartbreak, while Sandra was giving up her chance at motherhood to stay by Clint's side, he was secretly raising children with another woman. The contrast between her sacrifices and his choices made her eventual collapse even more tragic. This double life revealed not just Clint's complicated personality, but also how far he would go to maintain control. Sandra, who had once believed she was his equal, was slowly realizing that Clint was always hiding something behind his quiet smile and reserved personality. The damage this knowledge did to her trust was permanent, and it marked the beginning of the end for their once golden relationship. In the late 1980s, after years of films, awards, and what seemed like an unbreakable bond, Clint decided to end his relationship with Sandra in one of the coldest ways possible. He did not sit down and have a conversation, nor did he allow a moment of closure. Instead, while Sandra was away filming, Clint changed the locks on their shared home and moved her belongings into storage. When she returned, the place where she had lived for more than a decade was no longer hers. This was not just a breakup, it was an erasure of history. Sandra was devastated. She had lost her home, her partner, and her sense of security all at once. It was as though Clint wanted to erase not only her presence, but her memory. Many people around Sandra noticed how deeply this broke her spirit. She had invested everything into their relationship: her youth, her career opportunities, even her health. And in return, she was discarded like a stranger. This act of cruelty shocked Hollywood insiders, and later became one of the most discussed scandals of Clint's personal life. Sandra Locke did not stay silent after the sudden breakup. Determined to reclaim her dignity, she took Clint to court, filing a lawsuit for palimony and fraud. This legal battle was highly publicized and exposed parts of Clint's personal life he had always tried to keep private. Sandra argued that Clint had not only destroyed her career by limiting her opportunities in Hollywood, but also that he had manipulated her into making personal sacrifices that served his interests. During the trial, many shocking details came to light about Clint's financial control, his secret affairs, and his attempts to silence Sandra's voice. While the legal process was exhausting for Sandra, it was also a moment of empowerment. She was no longer just the quiet partner standing in Clint's shadow. She was fighting for her story to be heard. Although the case was eventually settled out of court, Sandra's bravery in standing up to one of Hollywood's most powerful men inspired many women who had faced similar struggles. Still, the damage to her career and reputation could not be undone, and she spent the rest of her life trying to rebuild what Clint's influence had destroyed. Even after the lawsuit, Sandra's suffering was not over. Hollywood, which often sides with its most powerful stars, quietly pushed her aside. Offers for meaningful roles dried up, and directors who had once admired her avoided working with her. It was as though Sandra had been blacklisted for daring to go against Clint. This quiet erasure hurt almost as much as the breakup itself, because Sandra was a talented actress and filmmaker in her own right. She had proven her skill in films like The Heart is a Lonely Hunter and Sudden Impact, yet she was treated as if her career had never existed. Years later, when Sandra passed away in 2018, Hollywood delivered its final insult. She was left out of the In Memoriam segment of the Oscars. For many fans, this was heartbreaking and unfair. Sandra had given decades of her life to film, Yet she was denied recognition even in death. To those who remembered her story, it felt like Clint's shadow had followed her to the very end, keeping her legacy